If you've ever wondered what it feels like to have your entire world ripped out from under you by the people who were supposed to be your foundation, stick around. My story isn't just about being disowned or starting over. It's about what happens when the past comes knocking, not with an apology, but with a demand. It's about the moment you realize you're no longer the one on your knees. And it's about the beautiful, terrible, and deeply satisfying justice you can build for yourself when the family you were born into decides you're no longer a part of it. Because my family threw me away for who I loved, and 15 years later, they came crawling back, begging me to save them from a man they couldn't possibly understand. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, is that the man they were so terrified of, the ruthless new CEO who was about to dismantle their entire world, was the same man I go home to every night. He's my husband. And this is the story of how we gave my family exactly what they deserved. My name is Julian Marshall, or at least, it was. For the first 18 years of my life, that name meant something in our small town of Cedar Creek. It meant stability. It meant tradition. The Marshalls owned Marshall & Sons Fine Cabinetry, the largest employer in the county, and a business started by my great-grandfather. The name carried the weight of oak and varnish, of sawdust-covered floors and calloused, hard-working hands. It was supposed to be my future. I was the smart one, the one with an eye for design, the one who spent summers learning the books from my dad Thomas, while my older brother Marcus was out getting into trouble. I was the one who was supposed to become the son in the company name. But all of that vanished in a single evening, over a plate of my mother's meatloaf that had suddenly turned to ash in my mouth. I was 18, home from my first semester at college, and I was in love. Deeply, truly, for the very first time. And I wanted my family to know. I wanted them to be a part of my happiness. I've replayed that scene 1,000 times in my head, a self-flagellating ritual I couldn't seem to stop for years. The four of us were at the dinner table, the same heavy mahogany table my grandfather had built. My father Thomas sat at the head, a stoic patriarch, carved from the same hardwood as his furniture. My mother, a woman who communicated primarily through anxious sighs and the clatter of silverware, sat opposite him. And beside me was Marcus, 2 years my senior, already cultivating the smug, unearned confidence of a man who's never been told no. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I just said it. There was no elegant way to do it. I told them I had met someone. I told them his name was Michael. I told them I was gay. Silence. Not a thoughtful silence. Not a processing silence. It was a dead, cold, absolute vacuum. My mother's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly airless room. Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh, a bark of derision. But it was my father's face that I'll never forget. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked disgusted, as if I'd just confessed to a murder. He carefully placed his knife and fork on his plate, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at me. His voice was low, devoid of all warmth, like stones grinding together. He said, "This is not my son. No son of mine would choose this perversion." He didn't yell. He didn't scream. It would have been better if he had. Instead, he just calmly and methodically erased me from his life. He told me to pack a bag. He said I was no longer welcome in his house. He said the family business, my legacy, my future, was no longer mine. It would all go to Marcus. My mother just sat there, tears silently streaming down her face, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at me. She just stared at her plate, a portrait of silent compliance. That was her role in the family, to absorb my father's decrees without question. Marcus just smirked, a cruel, triumphant little curl of his lip. He had won. He had always been jealous of my aptitude for the business, of my father's quiet pride in my work. Now he had it all by default. He got to be the heir, not because of merit, but because I had a fatal flaw. I loved the wrong person. I was given 1 hour. I packed a duffel bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it. As I walked out the front door, the door my great-grandfather had built, my father stood in the doorway. He didn't say goodbye. He just said, "You have made your choice. Now live with it." And then he closed the door, the solid thud of oak sealing my fate. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of silence. 15 years of building a life, from the wreckage they'd made of my own. I moved to the city, a place so big and anonymous it felt like another planet compared to Cedar Creek. The first few years were brutal. I worked 3 jobs, barista waiter, retail stocker, just to afford a tiny rundown apartment that always smelled of damp and my neighbor's cooking. There were nights I'd sit on my lumpy mattress, eating instant noodles, and the loneliness was a physical weight, a crushing presence in the room. I was completely and utterly alone. My extended family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, all followed my father's lead. I was a ghost to them. The shame of the family, neatly excised. It's a strange thing, to know that every person who shares your blood has collectively agreed to pretend you don't exist. But slowly, painfully, I started to build something new. I went to night school, finishing my business degree. I got a better job at a logistics firm, then a better one after that. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. I made friends, real friends, who became my found family. And then I met David. David was everything my family wasn't. He was brilliant, driven, and saw me for exactly who I was, not for who he wanted me to be. He was a force of nature, a man who had clawed his way up from a background, even tougher than mine. He was a corporate lawyer, who specialized in acquisitions, a shark in a world of minnows. But with me, he was gentle, supportive, and fiercely protective. He saw the scars my family had left on me, and instead of treating them like a weakness, he treated them like proof of my strength. He loved me not in spite of my past, but because of the man I had become after surviving it. We got married 5 years ago in a small ceremony on a rooftop overlooking the city, surrounded by the family we had chosen for ourselves. I had never been happier. I had a life. A real full and beautiful life that had absolutely nothing to do with Marshall and Son's fine cabinetry. And then last Tuesday, my phone rang. The number was from my hometown. My heart lurched. I almost didn't answer. But some morbid curiosity, some deeply buried, unhealed wound, made my thumb swipe to accept the call. A voice I hadn't heard in a decade crackled through the speaker. A voice that was older, thinner, and laced with a panic I had never heard before. It was my father. "Julian, is that you?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The name spoken in his voice felt alien. He didn't wait for an answer. He just plunged ahead, the words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. "Julian, I need you. We need you. You have to come home. It's the company. It's falling apart. Some vulture, some corporate raider from the city bought us out. He's gutting the place. He's firing everyone. He's going to fire your brother." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. My brother, the golden child, the rightful heir, was about to be fired, and I was supposed to care. My father's voice cracked. "He's destroying everything your great-grandfather built. Everything we built. You were always the smart one, Julian. You know business. You can talk to this man. You can reason with him. Please, you have to help us save the company." I stood there in the kitchen of the beautiful home I shared with my husband, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and I felt a cold, quiet calm settle over me. The shaking, broken boy who had been thrown out 15 years ago was gone. In his place was a man who understood power, who understood leverage, and who was looking at the ultimate karmic payback being delivered on a silver platter. Because my father had no idea. He had no idea who this new, unknown, ruthless CEO was. He had no idea that the man he was begging me to save him from was sleeping in my bed. That the man who had just bought out his precious company was David, my brilliant, driven, and fiercely protective husband. And as I listened to my father plead, I remembered the email I had received from David just that morning. It was a formal job offer. The company was being restructured, and he had just created a new position, vice president. It was mine. I took a breath and found my voice. It was steady, colder than I expected. "I'll think about it," I said, and I hung up, leaving the man who had cast me into the wilderness to twist in the wind. The game had changed, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I was holding all the cards. After I hung up the phone on my father, I didn't move. I just stood there in my kitchen, the phone still clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. The silence in the house was immense, but my head was screaming. It was a cacophony of the past and the present colliding. My father's panicked, wheezing voice, the solid final thud of that oak door closing 15 years ago, the phantom smell of sawdust and my mother's meatloaf. It was all there, a ghost storm raging inside me. My first impulse was a raw, childish flare of triumph. You see what you threw away. You need me now. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by the deep familiar ache of the original wound. It wasn't a clean cut, that banishment. It was a jagged tear that had never fully healed, and my father's call had just ripped it wide open again. The pain was dizzying. For a decade and a half, I had been a non-entity, a dirty secret, and now the moment they needed something, I was Julian again. I was the smart one. The hypocrisy was so profound it made me feel nauseous. That's how David found me a few minutes later, leaning against the kitchen counter, staring at nothing, just breathing. He came in, his briefcase in hand, and stopped short. He knows me better than anyone. He can read the slightest shift in my posture, the faintest shadow in my eyes. Jules, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. I have, I said. Or at least, I've heard one. My father called. David's entire demeanor changed. The relaxed end-of-day posture vanished, replaced by a sharp, protective stillness. He put his briefcase down slowly. He didn't press. He just waited. And so I told him. I told him about the desperate plea, the vulture from the city, the imminent firing of my sainted brother Marcus, and the absurd request for me, the family pariah, to ride in on a white horse and save them all. When I finished, David was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he walked over, took the phone from my hand, and gently placed it on the counter. He put his hands on my shoulders, his gaze steady and intense. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice quiet. I told him I'd think about it. A slow, dangerous smile spread across David's face. It was the smile he got right before he dismantled an opposing counsel in court or closed a particularly difficult deal. It was a smile that promised utter calculated devastation. "Good," he said. "Let them think. Let them stew in it." He led me over to the sofa and sat me down. He could see I was shaking, the adrenaline and the shock finally catching up to me. The call had fractured the peaceful life I had so carefully constructed. It forced me to look back, to remember everything I had tried so hard to forget. And the memories came, unbidden and sharp as glass. I was back in that dining room. I remembered the way Marcus had looked at me when I said I was gay. It wasn't just shock, it was validation. He had always seen me as less than as soft, and this was just the proof he needed. While he was out proving his masculinity by getting drunk and crashing his car, I was in the workshop, learning about joinery and wood grains. While he was failing classes, I was drafting designs on my computer that my father, in rare moments of unguarded honesty, would admit were better than his own. Marcus didn't hate me for being gay. He hated me for being better at being a martial son than he was. Being gay was just the excuse he, and my father, needed to finally get rid of the competition. I remembered the day I was supposed to get my grandmother's inheritance. She was my father's mother, a stern but fair woman, who had a soft spot for me. She saw the artist in me. In her will she'd left a small portfolio of stocks and a parcel of land just outside of town, specifically to me, to be given to me on my 21st birthday. I found out through a cousin, years later, that my father, as the executor, had petitioned the court. He'd argued that I was estranged and of unsound character, and had the inheritance absorbed into the general family trust, which of course he controlled. It was legal, technically. A judge had signed off on it. But it was theft. It was another way of erasing me, of taking what was mine and giving it to the son who deserved it. A plausible bit of legal maneuvering that would make anyone's blood boil, but was just obscure enough to be debatable. Was it truly illegal, or just morally bankrupt? It was one of the first things I'd told David about when we started getting serious, a story I'd told him in a quiet, defeated voice. He hadn't said much at the time, but he'd filed it away. David never forgot anything. I remembered the loneliness of those first years in the city, the crushing weight of holidays spent alone. I'd see families laughing in restaurants on Thanksgiving and feel a pang so sharp it would steal my breath. I sent a Christmas card once, in my second year away. Just a generic card with a picture of a snowman on it. I wrote, "Thinking of you. Love, Julian." I never got a reply. A month later, it was returned to me, unopened, with "Return to sender deceased" scrawled across the front in my mother's elegant handwriting. That was the day I stopped trying. The day I finally accepted that I was dead to them. I burned the card in my cheap little kitchen sink, watching the snowman melt into black ash. I cried until I had nothing left. Then I washed my face, went to my night class, and never looked back. That was my real turning point. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about survival, and I remembered meeting David. It was at a dull networking event I'd forced myself to go to. I was standing awkwardly by the bar, nursing a club soda, when he walked up to me. He wasn't like the other corporate types. There was an intensity to him, a restless energy under a bespoke suit. He asked me what I did. I told him I was a junior logistics manager. He asked me what I wanted to do. The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that. I told him I'd always wanted to be in design, to build things. I talked about wood, about form and function, about creating things that were both beautiful and useful. I probably sounded like a lunatic, but he didn't laugh. He listened. He listened with an attentiveness that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. That night, for the first time in years, I felt seen. Now sitting on my sofa, with David's steadying hand on my shoulder, all those memories swirled together. The pain, the struggle, the resilience, the love. They weren't just my past anymore. They were the foundation of the man I had become. David let me sit with it for a while. Then he got up and came back with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to me. "I've been watching them for a while, Jules," he said, his voice soft but with that familiar steel underneath. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to bring their toxicity into our life. But I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." He took a sip of his whiskey. "It started as a side project, a curiosity. After you told me the story about your grandmother's inheritance, I started digging, just a little. It wasn't hard to find the public filings for Marshall & Sons. The company has been failing for years. Marcus has been running it into the ground. He's been taking on massive debt, selling off assets to cover his own lavish spending. He treated the company like his personal piggy bank." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. I saw an opportunity, a distressed asset with good bones, mismanaged by an idiot. It was a perfect acquisition target. But for me it was more than that. It was personal. I saw what they did to you. I saw how they broke you, and then threw you away. And I saw them pissing all over the legacy you should have inherited. It wasn't about revenge, Julian, until it was. When I saw how deeply they were in debt, how vulnerable they were, I knew what I had to do. He explained it then. Over the last 18 months, he had been methodically, quietly, and completely legally buying up their debt from creditors. He'd used a series of anonymous LLCs to purchase controlling shares from minority stakeholders, who had long been fed up with Marcus's leadership. My family, arrogant and insular, never saw it coming. They were so convinced of their own small-town supremacy that they never imagined an outsider could, or would, dismantle their little kingdom. The final piece fell into place last week, when a major bank sold him the last block of debt he needed for a controlling interest. He said, "The phone call you got today, that wasn't a coincidence. The first thing my transition team did yesterday was freeze all non-essential executive spending and put a hold on Marcus's corporate credit card. Your father didn't call you because he misses you. He called you because the money stopped." The cold, hard truth of that statement settled in my gut. Of course, it was always about the money. Their love, their approval, their legacy, it was all transactional. David finished his whiskey and set the glass down. "So," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "here we are. I own them, Julian. I own the company. I own the debt. I own the land your grandmother wanted you to have. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The last vestiges of the broken, pleading boy vanished, burned away by a cold, hard resolve. The pain was still there, but it wasn't a weakness anymore. It was fuel. I looked at the man I loved, the man who had seen my worth when no one else had, the man who had just handed me the sword to slay my own dragons. I thought about my father's arrogant dismissal, my mother's silent betrayal, my brother's smug cruelty. I thought about 15 years of being nothing to them. "I want to go home," I said. But not as the prodigal son. I want to go home as the new owner. David's smile returned, wider this time, and filled with a fierce, terrible pride. That's what I was hoping you'd say, he said. Now, let's get to work. We have a company to save, and a family to teach a long overdue lesson. The next evening, my living room was transformed into a war room. David had brought home boxes of files, binders thick with financial statements, and a laptop displaying intricate spreadsheets that mapped out the entire corporate structure of Marshall & Sons. It was a far cry from the life of quiet domesticity we usually led. This was David in his natural element, the hunter laying out his strategy, and for the first time, I was his partner in the hunt. This isn't just a simple buyout, Julian, he explained, pointing to a complex flowchart on the screen. A simple buyout would have been too clean, too easy. They could have fought it, dragged it out in court, played the victim card in the local press. I wanted to ensure they had absolutely no ground to stand on, so I didn't just buy the company. I bought its entire ecosystem. He walked me through it, and the sheer ruthless brilliance of his plan was breathtaking. He hadn't just acquired a controlling interest in the stock. He had, through his shell corporations, bought the commercial loans the company owed to 3 different regional banks. He owned their debt. He had also acquired a majority stake in their primary lumber supplier, in a separate, quiet deal months earlier. This meant he controlled the price and availability of their most crucial raw material. And in a final masterstroke, he'd bought the small logistics company that handled all of Marshall & Sons shipping. He owned them from the roots to the branches. They were in a cage, and had no idea he held the only key. He slid a thick spiral-bound report across the coffee table. This is from the forensic accountants I hired. They went over the last 5 years of the company's books. He tapped the cover. Don't read it if you don't want to, but the short version is, Marcus is a thief. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. I didn't need to read the whole thing. The executive summary was damning enough. Marcus hadn't just been incompetent. He'd been actively embezzling. Lavish business expenses that were clearly personal vacations. Inflated invoices from shell companies he'd set up himself. Company funds used to pay for his mortgage, his car, his country club membership. He had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars, bleeding the company dry, while the loyal, hard-working employees had their hours cut and their benefits slashed. He was a parasite, and my father, in his blind favoritism, had either been too stupid to see it, or had willingly looked the other way. This report was our nuclear option. It wasn't just leverage, it was a potential criminal case. David let the weight of it sink in. Then he said, so, when your father calls you to reason with the new CEO, he's not just asking you to save the company. He's asking you to cover up a felony. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me speechless. They hadn't just thrown me away. They had expected me to come back and clean up a crime scene. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview on the screen told me everything I needed to know. It was my friend Leo. Leo and I had met years ago, working at the same soulless logistics firm. He was a loud, funny, fiercely loyal guy from Queens, who had appointed himself my big brother and protector from day one. He was the one who had talked me into going to night school, who had celebrated every small victory with me, and who had been the best man at my wedding to David. He knew the whole ugly story of my family, and his opinion of them was, to put it mildly, uncharitable. The text read, "Dude, David just called me, said something about regime change and Operation Karmic Retribution. You better not be starting a war without your loyal foot soldier. I'm on my way with pizza and beer. Don't do anything stupid until I get there." An hour later, Leo was sitting on my floor, a slice of pepperoni pizza in one hand, staring at the documents spread across the coffee table. His eyes were wide. "Holy crap, Jules," he said, his mouth full. "This isn't a hostile takeover. This is a public execution. I love it." Leo, true to form, was my voice of reason, but his version of reason was always unapologetically on my side. He wasn't there to preach forgiveness. He was there to make sure I was emotionally prepared for the fallout.
"Are you sure about this?" he asked, his tone shifting from awe to genuine concern. "I mean, I hate these people for what they did to you. On paper, this is beautiful, but these are still, well, they're the people who raised you. Going to war with them, even a war you're guaranteed to win, is going to mess with your head." He was right to be worried. A part of me, a small, stubborn, 18-year-old part, still craved their approval. And this plan felt like taking that small part of me and incinerating it for good. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. "It's already messing with my head," I admitted. "But Leo, they didn't just disown me. They tried to erase me. They stole from me. And now they want me to come back and save the son who did all of this. What choice do they leave me? This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about setting the record straight." Leo nodded, understanding. "Okay, I get it. Just promise me you'll watch yourself. And promise me you'll let me be there when you finally tell them. I want to see their faces. I'll bring popcorn." David, who had been quietly observing our conversation, then revealed the final piece of leverage, the part that was aimed not at the company, but directly at my heart, and at my father's hypocrisy. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling another file from his briefcase. It was thinner, containing property deeds and old legal documents. "I had my paralegals pull the chain of title on that land your grandmother left you." He spread the papers out. It turned out my father hadn't just absorbed the land into the family trust. 3 years ago, when the company was on the verge of defaulting on a major loan, he had used that specific parcel of land, my land, as collateral for a new high-interest emergency loan. He had forged the necessary signatures on a quitclaim deed, effectively claiming sole ownership to offer it up to the bank. It was a desperate, illegal move to keep the company afloat a little longer, to prop up Marcus's failing leadership. This was a detail that added a layer of undeniable fraudulent reality to their moral failings. It wasn't just a debatable interpretation of a will, it was bank fraud. "And the bank he took that loan from," David said with a predatory calm. "I bought them 6 months ago, so I don't just own the company's debt, I own the fraudulent mortgage on the land your father stole from you." Leo let out a low whistle. "Checkmate, you magnificent bastard," he breathed, looking at David with a mixture of fear and profound respect. The weight of it was immense. This wasn't just a corporate takeover, it was a moral reckoning. David had methodically gathered every single thread of their lies, their betrayals, their crimes, and woven them into an unbreakable net. And he was giving me the rope to pull it tight. David looked at me, his expression serious. "This is your call, Julian, all of it. We can burn the whole thing to the ground, sell it for parts, and walk away with a fortune. Or we can rebuild it. We can turn it into something good, something you can be proud of. We can expose your father for the fraud he is, or we can use it as leverage to make them go away quietly. The power is yours." My choice was a form of debatable logic in itself. What was the right thing to do? A younger me would have wanted to burn it all down, to make them suffer as I had suffered. But I wasn't that person anymore. Vengeance felt hollow. What I wanted was something more lasting. I wanted to build. I wanted to take the thing they had idolized, this monument to their narrow-minded tradition, and remake it in my own image. An image of inclusivity, integrity, and success they could never have achieved on their own. "Okay," I said, my voice firm, the decision crystallizing in my mind. "We don't burn it down. We fix it. We make it profitable. We make it fair. And we make it ours. But first, the old guard has to go. All of them." A look of profound pride shone in David's eyes. He nodded. "Then consider it done. Phase 1 begins tomorrow. We'll start by cutting out the rot from the bottom up. Let's see how your father likes the view when he realizes all the pillars holding up his little kingdom are gone." The plan was set. The pieces were in place. The silent takeover of Marshall and Sons had begun. And I, the ghost they had tried to exorcise, was about to become the master of the house. I felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a powerful, righteous calm. They had started this war 15 years ago. I was just about to finish it. The first wave of the offensive was silent, precise, and utterly devastating. David believed in the principle of dismantling an opponent's support structure before ever engaging the primary target. You don't charge the king. You take his knights, his rooks, and his bishops, leaving him isolated and helpless on the board. On Monday morning, a team of transition specialists, hired by one of David's anonymous LLCs, walked into the main office of Marshall & Sons. They weren't overtly aggressive. They were polite, professional, and armed with an authority that was absolute. Their first action wasn't to fire anyone. It was to announce a full, comprehensive audit of all departments, effective immediately. All accounts were frozen pending review. All major projects were put on hold.
The first people to be interviewed were not my family. They were the cronies, the sycophants. There was Bill, the head of sales, a man who got his job because he was my father's golfing buddy and whose primary skill was laughing at my father's jokes. He was the one who had once told me, after a few too many drinks at a company picnic, that I should try to be more normal if I ever wanted my father's respect. He was escorted out of the building by noon, his redundant position having been eliminated. Then there was Susan, the head of accounting, a woman who had been my mother's best friend since high school. She was the one who had undoubtedly helped Marcus cook the books for years. The transition team didn't fire her. They simply placed her on paid administrative leave, pending the results of the forensic audit. The unspoken threat hung in the air. Cooperate and maybe you'll escape charges. The look of sheer terror on her face, described to me in glorious detail by David's on-site manager, was a small sweet down payment on the justice that was coming. The news ripped through the small town of Cedar Creek like a wildfire. This wasn't just a corporate restructuring, it was a cultural earthquake. The old comfortable who-you-know system was being systematically dismantled by cold, efficient strangers. And then the calls started. It began with a text from an unknown number. It was my Aunt Carol. "Julian, your father is beside himself. You need to call him. This new company is destroying everything. This is a family matter." I stared at the text. A family matter. For 15 years, I hadn't been family. Now I was the key to its salvation. I deleted the message without replying. An hour later my phone rang. It was my Uncle Mark, Marcus's biggest defender. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a rambling, incoherent mess of blustering anger. Who do these people think they are? Coming in here, firing good people. Bill has a family, and Marcus is working himself to the bone to try and fix this, and these corporate jackals are treating him like a criminal. You have to do something, Julian. This is your family's legacy on the line. My family's legacy. He meant my father's legacy. My brother's legacy. My brother's legacy. My legacy had been tossed in the trash 15 years ago. I saved the voicemail. It was a beautiful little recording of pure, unadulterated hypocrisy. The noise, as David and I had started calling it, was escalating. They were panicking, and their panic was making them sloppy. They were reaching out to the one person they had spent over a decade pretending didn't exist. Their desperation was a confession. They were admitting, without admitting it, that I had a power, an intelligence, they now desperately needed. My silence in response was my new weapon. It was the quiet that was driving them insane. Every unanswered call, every deleted text, was a small victory, a quiet assertion of the control they had lost. The centerpiece of the entire drama, of course, was my brother, Marcus, who had coasted through life on a wave of privilege and my father's blind adoration, was having a full-scale meltdown. His corporate credit card was declined at his favorite expensive restaurant where he was having a business lunch. His key card was deactivated for the executive wing of the building. When he tried to storm into the accounting department to demand answers, he was politely but firmly blocked by one of the transition specialists, a woman who, according to the report I got, looked like she could bench press a filing cabinet, and did not seem impressed by his yelling. This led to the pièce de résistance. A string of voicemails left on my father's phone, which my father, in an act of breathtakingly poor judgment, forwarded to me. He clearly thought it would galvanize me into action, to show me the chaos I needed to quell. He thought it was proof of the problem. To me, it was proof of the solution. The first voicemail was just sputtering rage. "Dad, they cut me off. They cut off my card. They're treating me like some kind of employee. You have to call this CEO guy and tell him who I am. The second, an hour later, was laced with paranoid delusion and his favorite brand of bigotry. This is a witch hunt, Dad. It's probably some liberal psycho from the city who hates guys like us. It's probably some gay agenda to destroy good traditional businesses. I bet that's what it is. This whole thing stinks of it. Hearing him spit the word gay as an insult, the same way he had all those years ago, didn't even hurt anymore. It just solidified my resolve. He hadn't changed. He hadn't grown. He was the same cruel, ignorant boy, just trapped in a failing middle-aged man's body. The final voicemail was the best. It was recorded late at night, and Marcus was clearly drunk. His words were slurred, filled with a pathetic self-pitying rage. It's all Julian's fault, you know. None of this would have happened if you hadn't let him get so good at the books. You made me look bad. You always liked him more. This is his curse on us. Even from a distance, he's ruining my life. I played that last one for David. He listened, stone-faced, then looked at me. The golden child is cracking, he said. He's not just blaming the new CEO anymore. He's blaming the ghost. He's telling your father that the problem started when you were still there. He's accidentally making your case for you. My father's forwarded messages were a desperate attempt at manipulation. He was trying to make me feel guilty, responsible. Look at the chaos, son. Your brother is falling apart. The family is in turmoil. Only you can fix this. But he had miscalculated badly. He was showing me a fire and begging me to put it out, not realizing I was the one who had supplied the gasoline and the match. Every panicked message he sent me, every plea, every guilt trip, only served to harden my heart further. I sat there, in the quiet of my city apartment, a world away from the smoldering ruins of their lives, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. For so long, I had been the one reacting to their whims, their cruelty, their rules. I had been on the defensive for 15 years. Now, for the first time, I was on the offense. They were reacting to me. My silence, my inaction, was the most powerful move I could make. It was forcing them to confront the consequences of their own choices, and they couldn't stand it. The silent takeover was working perfectly. Their foundations were crumbling. Their allies were gone. Their power was an illusion. And soon, very soon, the king himself would be left standing all alone on the board, wondering how he had been so completely and utterly outplayed. All he would have left is the ghost he thought he had banished long ago. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. It was, for all intents and purposes, a formality. A public execution dressed up in the language of corporate governance. David, as the new majority power, didn't even need to attend. He orchestrated the entire thing remotely through his lead attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria, who seemed to take a particular professional pleasure in dismantling entitled mediocrity. David and I followed the proceedings from our living room. He had a secure video feed of the conference room, the audio muted. We didn't need to hear their pathetic protests. We just wanted to see their faces. It felt like watching the final scene of a movie where the villains finally get their comeuppance. There they were, gathered around the big mahogany conference table my grandfather had built. My father, Thomas, looking a decade older than he had a week ago, his face a mask of grim disbelief. My brother, Marcus, trying to project an air of defiant arrogance, but the sweat beading on his brow and the panicked darting of his eyes betrayed him. The few remaining board members, old family allies, looked cowed and defeated. Maria, appearing on the large screen at the head of the table, was a picture of cool efficiency. She began the meeting. The first item on the agenda, the termination, for cause of the acting CEO, Marcus Marshall. David unmuted the audio. We heard Maria's voice, crisp and clear, as she laid out the findings of the preliminary audit. She didn't use emotional language. She just stated facts. A pattern of misappropriation of company funds, totaling an estimated $700,000 over 3 years. Fraudulent invoices submitted by shell corporations, registered to Mr. Marshall's home address, leveraging company assets for personal loans and ventures unrelated to the business of Marshall and Sons. She went on, listing each of Marcus's financial sins in excruciating detail. It was the dossier David had shown me, now being read into the official record. Marcus's face went from pale to ghostly white. My father slumped in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. The other board members just stared at the table, refusing to make eye contact. When Maria was done, she simply said, "The new ownership proposes a vote of no confidence and immediate termination. All in favor." On the screen we saw her hand go up. Then one by one, the other board members, the so-called family friends, raised their hands. They were saving their own skins. The vote was unanimous. Marcus was out. Security will now escort Mr. Marshall from the premises to collect his personal belongings, Maria stated flatly. We watched as 2 uniformed security guards entered the room and stood behind my brother's chair. The humiliation was absolute, public, undeniable. Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over, and stormed out of the room shouting obscenities. It was a pathetic, undignified end to his reign. The next item was my father. The ceremonial non-voting title of Chairman Emeritus is hereby dissolved, Maria announced. And as a final matter of new business, the portrait of Thomas Marshall will be removed from the lobby, along with all other family portraits, to reflect the company's new forward-looking direction. That, for me, was the most powerful blow. It wasn't about the money or the title. It was about the legacy. David was erasing their history from the company, just as they had tried to erase me from the family. We watched on the muted screen as a maintenance worker came into the conference room and unhooked my father's heavy gilded portrait from the wall. My father just sat there, watching his own face be carried out of the room like a piece of old furniture. He was officially a nobody in the house his grandfather had built. The power shift was complete. That evening, the desperate calls began again. But this time, they were different. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. My mother called, sobbing, "Julian, how can you let this happen? Your father is a broken man." They took his picture off the wall, his own father's company. "It's all he had left. You have to stop this." I didn't say anything. What could I say? You stood by and watched him break me, and you didn't say a word. You chose his pride over your son. I just listened to her cry for a moment. Then I quietly ended the call. Then my father called. His voice was a hoarse whisper. All the bluster, all the patriarchal authority was gone. It was the voice of a defeated man. "Julian," he rasped. "Okay, you win. Whatever this is, you've won. Just tell me what you want. We can fix this. I'll talk to Marcus. We'll give you your old job back. Head of design. I'll give you a stake in the company. A real stake this time. Just call off your dogs. This isn't business anymore. This is cruel. This is your grandfather's company, Julian." This was it. The moment I had unconsciously craved for 15 years. The moment he would finally have to bargain with me, to acknowledge my worth. But hearing it now, it felt empty. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he had lost. For the first time I answered him. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. "It's not your company to offer me a stake in anymore, Dad," I said, putting a quiet emphasis on the word Dad, a word I hadn't used in our few interactions. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the dawning, horrified confusion. What do you mean?" he stammered. "The company has been sold," I said, my voice like ice. "You have no more say. You have no more power. You have nothing left to offer me." And I hung up the phone. The final piece of their counter-manipulation came an hour later. An email from my mother. The subject line was family. Inside there were no words. Just a dozen scanned photographs. Me as a baby in my father's arms. Me and Marcus on a swing set. The 4 of us at Christmas, smiling in front of a tree. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to appeal to a sentimentality they themselves had killed. She was trying to remind me that we were once a happy family, hoping I would forget that they were the ones who had burned that family to the ground. I looked at the pictures, at the smiling faces of the ghosts of people I once knew. I felt a brief flicker of sadness for the boy in those photos, for the life he thought he was going to have. Then I selected all the images and dragged them into the trash, just as they had done to me. The power had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably reversed. They were no longer the gatekeepers of my happiness or my future. They were ghosts now, haunting a house that no longer belonged to them. And the time for the final confrontation, The face-to-face revelation was finally here. 2 days later, my father and Marcus drove to the city. Having been stonewalled at every turn, they had finally done some digging and found the public registration for the primary LLC that now owned Marshall & Sons. The address was a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. David's corporate law firm, which he used as the official headquarters for his private investment ventures. They were coming to confront the monster in his lair, to plead their case to the faceless CEO who had ruined them. David and I had planned this moment meticulously. He wasn't in the office. He was working from home, monitoring everything from his laptop. The stage was set for me. My father and Marcus arrived in the lobby, dressed in their ill-fitting small-town suits, looking completely out of place amongst the sleek, urban professionals striding through the marble atrium. They approached the front desk, their faces a mixture of fear and bravado. My father, his voice trembling slightly, announced that they were here to see the CEO of Nexus Holdings. The receptionist, a calm professional woman named Claire, whom David had briefed personally, consulted her screen. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone polite but firm. "The CEO is not available. However, he's asked the new vice president to meet with you. If you'll just take a seat, he'll be with you shortly." I watched them on the security feed from a small office just off the reception area. I saw my father and Marcus exchange a confused look. A vice president. They had clearly expected to be stonewalled again. This was an unexpected development, a small glimmer of hope for them. They sat down in the plush leather chairs, looking nervous and small. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the culmination of 15 years of pain, of struggle, of building a new life. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, repeating David's words. It's about justice. I straightened my tie, smoothed down my jacket, and walked out of the office. I crossed the lobby and stopped in front of their chairs. "Gentlemen," I said, "thank you for coming. I'm the new vice president. I can see you in conference room B." They both looked up at the sound of my voice. The reaction was everything I had imagined, and yet so much more. It happened in slow motion. My father's eyes widened, his jaw literally dropping open in slack-jawed disbelief. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a statue carved from chalk. Marcus's expression was even better. His face, which had been set in a look of arrogant defiance, crumpled into a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. He looked from me to the Nexus Holdings sign on the wall and back to me again, his brain utterly failing to compute what he was seeing. I simply turned and walked toward the conference room, not waiting to see if they would follow. I knew they would. They had no other choice. I stood at the head of a long, polished table. The city skyline spread out behind me like a kingdom. They shuffled in after me, closing the door behind them, their movements clumsy and uncertain. They looked like strangers who had wandered into the wrong room. "Hello, Father," I said, my voice even. "Marcus." My father finally found his voice, a strangled, croaking sound. "Julian." What is this? What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said simply. "I'm the vice president." "Vice president of what?" Marcus spat, a flicker of his old venom returning. "Some soulless corporate hack firm." "Vice president of the company that now owns Marshall & Sons," I clarified, letting the words hang in the air. "The company that just fired you for embezzlement. The company that stripped you," I said, looking at my father, "of your title." The truth landed on them like a physical blow. My father sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Marcus just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "But the CEO," my father mumbled into his palms. "This ruthless man, this monster who is trying to destroy our family." "He's not a monster," I said, my voice hardening. "He's my husband." If I had pulled out a gun, the effect could not have been more explosive. Marcus actually recoiled, taking a step back. My father looked up, his eyes filled with a horror that was almost biblical. The final impossible piece had clicked into place. The man who had engineered their downfall, the great faceless enemy they had feared, was intimately and inextricably linked to the son they had thrown away.
Their homophobia had come full circle to be their undoing. They weren't just ruined. They were ruined by everything they despised. I let them sit with that for a moment, letting the reality of their situation suffocate them. Then I slid 2 files across the polished table. This one, I said, tapping the thicker file, is the full unredacted report from the forensic accountants. It details every dollar you stole, Marcus. Enough to put you in prison for a very long time. We could hand this over to the district attorney today. I pushed the second thinner file toward my father. And this one is the file on the fraudulent loan you took out against my grandmother's property. The property you stole from me. That's bank fraud, father. A federal offense. They were trapped. Utterly and completely. Now, I said, leaning forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense register. Here is the new reality. Marshall and Sons, as you knew it, is dead. The company is being restructured and rebranded. The family legacy you were so fond of talking about is over. You have 2 choices. I stood up and walked to the window, turning my back to them to look out at the city. My city. Choice 1. You fight us. We hand these files over to the authorities. Marcus goes to prison. You, father, will be disgraced and likely face charges of your own. The Marshall name will be synonymous with crime and failure in Cedar Creek for generations. You will lose everything, publicly and painfully. I turned back to face them. Or, choice 2. You sign this, I said, placing a third document on the table. It was a thick non-disclosure agreement and a severance contract. You will sign over any remaining shares you have for the symbolic price of $1. You will agree to never speak of this, or of me, or of my husband, ever again. In exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges. The company will assume your personal debts related to the business. You will be given a small severance, enough to live on for a year, maybe if you're careful, enough to disappear quietly. You will walk away with nothing but your freedom, and you will never ever contact me again. The silence in the room was absolute. My father was pale, trembling. Marcus was staring at the file with his name on it, his face a mess of terror and rage. I had presented them with an impossible choice that was no choice at all. It was ruin versus annihilation. The debatable moral proportionality of my actions was clear. I was offering them a mercy they had never offered me, but on terms so crushing it was a punishment in itself. My father looked up at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in his life. Not for the company, not for his son Marcus, but for himself. Julian, he whispered. Please. My name, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the glass of the skyscraper window, is Julian, and you have 1 hour to decide. I walked out of the room, leaving them with the wreckage of their lives spread out on the table. The war was over, and I had won. They signed the papers. Of course they did. An hour later, a defeated-looking Marcus, and a ghost of a man who used to be my father, walked out of the building, clutching the documents that officially severed them from their legacy, their company, and from me. They got into their car and drove back to Cedar Creek, to a life of quiet shame and irrelevance. The town soon learned that the Marshalls were no longer in charge. The narrative that settled was one of gross mismanagement by Marcus, and a necessary corporate takeover. The full sordid truth remained our secret, a final quiet mercy they didn't deserve, but that I had granted them anyway. It wasn't for them, it was for me. It was the final act of closing that door, but this time from my side. In the months that followed, David and I did exactly what we said we would. We rebuilt the company. We rebranded it as Cedar Creek Artisans. We invested in new equipment, rehired many of the skilled older employees Marcus had let go, and instituted profit-sharing and fair wage policies. We kept the company in Cedar Creek, saving the jobs that were the lifeblood of the town. I took over the design department, and for the first time, I was able to bring my own vision to life, creating new lines of furniture that were both modern and true to the handcrafted spirit of the original workshop. The company began to thrive in a way it hadn't in decades. One of my first acts as vice president was to establish the Marshall Foundation, using my old family name for one last purpose. It's a scholarship fund, endowed by a percentage of the company's profits, dedicated to helping LGBTQ+ youth from rural areas get to college and pursue their dreams. The first scholarship was awarded this year to a young man from my old high school who wanted to be a graphic designer. Attending the small ceremony in the town hall and handing him that check was a moment of vindication, more profound than any boardroom victory. I was using the legacy they tried to deny me to build a better future for kids just like me. My father and Marcus faded away. They sold their large family home and moved into a small rented house on the edge of town. Their social standing evaporated. They became a cautionary tale whispered about at the local diner. I never heard from them, or any of my other relatives ever again. The silence was no longer a punishment. It was peace. So here I am now. I have a job that I love, a husband who is my partner in every sense of the word, and a life I built not on the ashes of my past, but on the strength I gained from surviving it. The pain of what my family did will probably always be a part of me, a faint scar on my soul, but it no longer defines me. It's just a part of the story of how I became the man I am today. And I have to be honest, it wasn't about revenge, until it was. There was a part of me that savored their defeat, that took a grim satisfaction in their downfall. But in the end, when the dust settled, I realized it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my name, my story, and my worth. It was about proving that the love they called a perversion was actually the source of my greatest strength. My family taught me a valuable lesson all those years ago, that blood is not always thicker than water. Sometimes the family you choose is the only one that truly matters. They closed a door on me, so I bought the house, tore it down, and built a mansion in its place. So I have to ask you, what would you have done? Was it justice, or did I go too far? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read all of them, and hearing your stories and your perspectives means the world to me. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories about getting the last word.